For such soldiers who are immortal are the subject of this tale. They are still alive now, having lived on the planet for thousands of years. They have not revealed who they are and have only rescued people. Andy and Booker are first presented to us. These are two of those four soldiers, and Copley, a retired CIA agent, is scheduled to meet them as the team's leader. Copley requested that they conduct a rescue operation, but Andy had not participated in any missions for years due to her aversion of seeing blood. He is informed by the coach that it is a rescue mission. In order to save a bunch of young children, Andy must lead his squad. In an attack on a school, a group of terrorists killed the teachers and abducted the children. Andy's mission is to lead his group to South Sudan, where the militants are incarcerating the youngsters. He finds himself in accord with Copel because this problem touches the lives of children. She and her three allies arrive in South Sudan. Each of the four soldiers is immortal. Even if they are shot, they will recover from the wounds fast. Their recuperation time is determined by the extent of harm, but they cannot be killed. These four make their way to the terrorist hiding place after walking a considerable distance. Those military now have an easy time fighting terrorists. Many of them are also killed by them. As they proceed, they come across some shoes that belong to little children that are lying outside of a chamber. Thus, they believe the kids are in the room. The room is entirely empty when all four of them walk in. Then a fire breaks out. They are shot by some soldiers who come from all sides. The troops believe they are dead as all four of them collapse to the ground after numerous bullets have been fired. Then all of a sudden, their eyes open and their wounds begin to mend themselves. They rise once more and ruthlessly murder them all. Andy then notices a covert camera set up there. Actually, Agent Koppel was the one who planned all of this. He was viewing everything on his screen thanks to the cameras he had placed throughout the area. He sought evidence that there were four unkillable humans left on the planet. He came up with this plan for that reason. He had the evidence now. Andy and his group were terrified that the world would learn the truth they had been keeping for so long. In order to prevent CIA agent Copel from informing the world that there are four people alive who cannot be killed, Andy devises a plan to murder her. The picture changes, and we see a U.S. Army team before they murder Copley. These folks are trying to find a terrorist. Another member of that army is a girl named Nile. She enters a house she suspects to make sure. After entering the residence, Nile and her friends locate the terrorist and murder him. However, the terrorist cuts Nile's throat and causes extensive blood when he stabbed her in the neck just before she dies. That's where Nile loses consciousness. Andy has a dream on the other side. In her dream, she sees a stabbed girl who is still alive. These people can, in fact, recognize each other in dreams. If there is someone like them in the world, they will dream about them, which means Nile is one of them. Andy, however, is worried because no dreams followed the last encounter with Booker, which took place 2 millennia ago. How then did this girl just show up? Andy makes the decision that she will track down that girl and take her with her because of this. Nile, on the other hand, is terrified. She was stabbed in the neck in public by the terrorist, but her neck is now free of the knife mark. Nile is still alive in spite of the severe injuries. This is shocking to everyone. We see CIA agent Copley on the opposite side. He meets a pharmaceutical firm owner. Copley plays the video of Andy and his group for Steve. Steve is astounded to learn from the video that Andy and his group have survived numerous gunshot wounds. Steve is informed by Copley that he will capture those four and give them to him. To guarantee that no human ever perishes, Steve must create a formula after testing them. Germany is receiving Nile on the opposite side. However, Andy gets there and saves her. Nile opens her eyes and finds nothing to make sense of. She finds herself inside a car and leaps out of it. Nile then drops to the ground when Andy shoots her in the head from behind. Nile eventually starts to recover, and her wounds start to heal. Andy wanted Nile to understand that she, too, is immortal and that their fates are now linked. However, Nile is still unable to comprehend anything. Andy is stabbed in the chest by her. They were about to fly to their buddies, but Andy manages to pick up Nile and transport her to an airbase. Andy overindulges in alcohol on the plane, which causes her to nod off. Nile takes advantage of this by asking the pilot to land the aircraft, tying Andy's hands and holding him at gunpoint. But Andy knows all the tactics because he's lived for hundreds of years. She effortlessly overwhelms Nile and renders her unconscious. When Nile awakens, Andy tells her a lot, and Nile discovers she is very emotional. Andy reaches Paris, where her squad is, after several hours of travel. After that, Andy introduces Nile to her group. Nile, meanwhile, is overwhelmed and perplexed by her survival. She asks how old Andy is. Nile is completely shocked when Andy suggests that she might be 2,000 years old. Then he looks to Naomi for clarification. It means that those people are very emotional and they can never die. However, India responds, that isn't true at all. Additionally, the moment of their death arrives. They had another pal a long time ago. His abilities were taken away from him when he was engaged in combat. His wounds ceased to heal after that, and he passed away immediately thereafter, he adds. Which means that those people can die, but no one knows for how long they will live. Everyone goes to sleep at night, but Nal's eyes open up out of nowhere. He's had a nightmare. In his dream, he saw a female who was still alive inside an iron casket that was resting on the seashore. Which means she is also emotional like them. All four are astonished to hear this. They say the girl's name is Queen and that she shares their emotional side. For 500 years, she has been imprisoned within the coffin in that sea. In addition to being the first motor, Queen was the first soldier to arrive on Earth. She then met Andy, and the two of them fought numerous wars and saved lives. Queen and India visited England a century ago. They were there to save several innocent people who had been falsely accused of practicing witchcraft, but it backfired. They were imprisoned by the locals. Because they both lived forever, those people regarded them as witches. For this reason, Queen and Andy were given death sentences. However, they survived the hanging. Then, using their cunning, the locals imprisoned Queen in an iron coffin and tossed it into the ocean. They also intended to do the same to Andy, but Andy managed to get away from them. After meeting his other buddies, NDA made a concerted effort to locate Queen. However, they gave up when Queen could not be located. Andy went for a nighttime stroll before the army of Copals arrived at his hiding place. When they arrived, they removed Inky and Joy, two of his friends. Andy discovers that Booker is seriously hurt when she gets home. Booker informs her that both of their friends have been captured by Copley's soldiers. Andy is well prepared when CPP send his soldiers to kidnap him again. She assaults each of those troops viciously, killing them all by herself. In order to liberate their fellows, Andy, Booker, and Nylon now begin their journey toward Koppel. Booker and Nylon accompany Andy to her former hiding place, where she lived a few hundred years ago. However, NDA then observes that Andy's shoulder wound is still not mending, which means that her power is probably gone. Without telling Booker, she walks to the grocery store by herself, gives herself a shoulder rub, and then begins to return. Cope and Nickett gives Steve everything in the interim so that he can investigate them and learn how they become immortal. However, Steve begins hurting both of them because he wants to witness firsthand how their wounds heal. The fact that their wounds are healing in front of him astounds him. Nickett is now brought into the laboratory, where numerous bodily samples are collected. Now, though, Steve won't abandon them until he understands how they grew emotional. Cooker learns Koppel's location on the opposite side. They all arrive at CPP's site. However, Nylon declines to back Love and NDA. She informs them, I also have a family, and I want to go and live there with my family. She then sends Andy off with her car keys and revolver. Nylon stops en route and inspects his firearm before departing. He notices that there is nothing in the pistol. Booker and NDA enter Copel's home on the opposite side. At gunpoint, the NDA asks Copel where their fellow members are being held. However, he shoots Andy in the stomach after betraying Andy from behind. In order to help Steve, Copley explains that if Steve finds out how those people are still alive by extracting their DNA, then he will surely kill them. Steve will also understand how to kill such individuals. Booker wanted to die because he was tired of existing for so long. He wanted to back Steve because of this. However, Booker observes that Andy's wound has not yet healed. He was unaware that Andy had developed into a typical person. Seeing this makes him incredibly sad. However, Steve then arrives with his guys, renders them unconscious, and removes them. Andy is treated and saved within the lab. When Nile notices his gun is empty, he becomes suspicious and alters his strategy. He approaches Copley and begins inquiring about his friends. Copley, however, now regretted his choice as well. He had noticed that Steve was more interested in learning how those people become immortal than in the admirable work they had done. Copley, on the other hand, had watched those four's previous operations and was aware that they had only saved people. Copley had stood by Steve since he didn't want anyone to lose a loved one in the future, and his wife had passed away from cancer. He was on the team for that reason. Together, he hoped to discover the recipe for immortality. In order to save Andy and his pals, he now chooses to assist Nile. Using his card, the co-player sends Nile into the lab. 3 guards approach Nile and shoot him. They believe Nile is dead, but Nile wakes up and shoots them all. When the other troops notice this on video, they attack Nile as well, but Nile kills them all and gets to his friends. The 4 of them begin attacking the troops after she releases them. Even though Andy is still fighting strong, her wounds are not getting better, which is causing her a lot of suffering. Andy quickly defeats those guards and eliminates them all because to her thousands of years of experience. The 5 then learn that Steve and his men are hidden in a different building. They enter the building and murder every guard. Steve quickly leaves that location and runs in the direction of Andy. He confronted the enemy at gunpoint since he knew the adversary had not yet gained immortality. Steve and Nile run forward and jump from the building. After they have descended from such a noteworthy altitude, Steve dies from his wounds and Nile lives. The 5 members of the group then successfully complete their mission and reach a secret location. At that point, Andy and his team conclude that Booker has betrayed them. For the next 100 years, Booker must live alone as a penance. They will reunite at their hidden spot at the end of the century. Despite their desire to keep Booker, they had to send him on his way. Now, Andy and her crew go to Copley and strike a deal with him. "You are very good at research," she informs him. "Therefore, you will need to do research and assign us tasks that will enable us to assist others." Booker, on the other hand, lives alone. This makes him quite depressed, so he begins drinking excessively. However, one day he is going back to his home after drinking. Upon entering his home, he notices a girl sipping water. This girl, who has mysteriously emerged from the water in a coffin, is none other than Queen. The film then comes to a close.